Welcome everybody to my channel. If you haven't been here before, please click on the subscribe button. If you've been here, welcome back. Today we're going to build a workbench table. Since this is my first time building one, I don't want to spend $1,000 building it either. So I found this farmhouse project panel. It's 30 by 72 inches, which is basically how big I wanted to build the table anyhow, so it worked out almost perfectly. It's a glued panel board. It's lighter weight. It's not a butcher block. I could have gone with a butcher block. The butcher block right now is like 250 bucks for the same size. So just to try this out, I'm going to go with this. Worst case scenario is I pull the top off later, put a harder top on, but the bottom will be solid as can be. So if I measured correctly with all the reductions I made, I need 4 by 4 by 8s. I need the top panel or 4 2 by 8s if you're going to do 2 by 8s and glue them together. I got a couple 1 by 1 furring strips. I'm going to make shelving on the bottom. I got like 5 2 by 4s, and then I got 4 deck panels. I'm going to make my bottom shelf out of the deck panels. So I'm going to build the frame. I'm going to use the 1 by 1s on the side and then lay the deck panels across. And if I run out, I've got some spare lumber here and there. Hopefully I got the right stuff for the job without having to make another trip back to Lowe's, but it wouldn't be the first time if I ever did. The other thing is I've got some lag bolts here, 5/16 lag bolts, 5 inches long. I'm going to use these in the top and the bottom legs, just so I got some super stable bottom. And I'll probably use some like decking screws, 3 inches to hold the sideboards on and just hold it in place while I put it together. So I've got my plans right here. What I want to do first is cut my 4 corner posts. I'm going to cut them at 33 inches long. That way my board top is 1.5 inches thick. That puts me at my 34.5 inch height, which is where I wanted to be at. So I got my 4 by 4 laid out here. I'm going to measure off 33 inches on this end, 33 inches off of that end. That way I've got 2 factory cut ends. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other 4 by 4 I've got over there. So now that I've got my boards marked, I'm going to take them over to the chop saw and chop them off. So you could take a skill saw and cut these off if you wanted to. I just have to have a chop saw, so this will make the job easier. You don't necessarily have to have one, but what I want to do is when I cut this, on my pencil line here, you have to take in consideration the thickness of your blade. So if you cut the blade right on that, you're going to lose 1/8 of an inch. So what I did is I lined up my blade where it's just on the outside of my pencil line. I'm not sure if you can see that with the camera angle or not. So basically, I'm going to cut on the outside edge of the pencil line on both sides. That way I've got my full 33 inch board. And the same thing, I flipped this around. That way I could make sure I'm still cutting on the outside edge. I could slide it on through, but if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, when you slide it on through to cut your next cut, you end up cutting this on the outside edge, which may actually be the inside edge if you didn't flip the board over. One last thing, when you're cutting, make sure you're pushed up tight against your fence. So one other thing you can do is if you're working alone, I've got a little roller to help me hold the boards up, but as you saw in the first time, it dropped off the other side. So if you're going to do that, make sure when you clamp, you don't clamp it to where your board rotates or twists. Again, that'll keep it tight against your fence and keep you from possibly dropping it or making an inaccurate cut. And there's my 4 legs. So I've taken a square, I've lined up the ends of all my boards so they're nice and flush. What I want on my table is I want to inlay this. So I'm going to take my table saw and I'm going to notch out little grooves in here, 1.5 inches deep, and then I'm going to chip them out and I'm going to lay my 2 by 4 in there. You can just nail your 2 by 4 to the outside if you measure properly if you want to. I'm just going to go for a different look just because I want to try it. I also want another board going across the front of my table at the bottom, because I'm going to put shelving in the bottom. So about 12 inches up, I'm going to do another one. Again, I'm going to follow my plan over here. So 12 inches up, I'm going to start notching in for the 2 by 4. And over here, instead of 33 inches up, 29.5 inches up, I'm going to have another notch in here. So I'm just going to measure down 3.5 inches. I'm going to go 3.5 inches down. Pencil, 3.5, 3.5, and 3.5. So I'm going to take a straight edge, I'm going to line up my lines. Sorry I'm doing this backwards, I'm not left-handed, so it's going to feel a little awkward to me, but just so you can see what's going on here. And I'm going to pencil across there, and I'm going to cut this part here. So I put X's on there. I'm going to repeat on the bottom. I'm going to go to 12 inches up, and then I'm going to go to 15.5 inches up. So I'm going to section out a piece of that across the middle here. So look at my plan over here. I may drop this, if I put this at 12 inches, it's going to be way up towards the middle. I don't think I like it up that high, so that's the good part about drawing your own plan. I'm going to drop it down to about there, which puts me at 4 inches. I think when I was doing this, I wasn't thinking about it being that way. I was thinking about it being that way because I was thinking about putting shelves in. So I need to change this a little bit. I'm going to drop this down to 4 inches. That way it'll make it closer to the bottom and my shelving still goes across there. So I'm still flush at the top. I haven't moved anything. So I'm going to go do the same thing I did up top. I'm going to mark these at 4 inches. My straight edge. Pencil across. Now I'm going to go 3.5 up from that, so that's 7.5 inches. So 7.5, 7.5. And again, I have not done this before. This is the first time I've ever tried this, so if it turns out to be a complete failure, it happens. I may have to adjust some things here and there, but hopefully it all works out fine. Just looking at my 2x4, it's inside my pencil marks, I should be good. Same thing, straight edge this. And then I'm going to cut these out here. So I'm going to put X's on so I know that's the part I'm cutting out. And again, this will be 1.5 inches deep. So cut these out. Cut those out 1.5 inches deep on the table saw, and then we'll be ready for the next step. So I'm on my table saw here, and what I want to do is I want to set the depth of my blade to the height I want to cut. I don't know if I get the camera down with the thing or not. Basically, I'm taking my tape measure, putting it on my saw, and I'm going to raise it up to 1.5 inches. That way I can cut into the board 1.5 inches deep without cutting all the way through it. So to verify I've got my blade in the right height, I've just got a scrap piece of 2x4. I'm going to push it through, and the blade should just barely come through here, because if you cut too deep, your board's going to inset. It's not going to look as good. If you cut too shallow, the board's going to stick out. So I want to get it as close as possible to where I want it. So as you can see it cutting, it just barely made it through the top, which is exactly what I want. That way when I lay my board in there, my board will lay in there almost perfectly. Good angle here. So what I want to do is I want to basically take my fence, I'm going to push it into where my first line is. So I know this is where my groove is going to be, where my 2x4 is going to sit. Same as the other way, except for this time I want to cut on the inside edge, not the outside. So I want to make sure my blade is lined up to the inside edge of this line, or right at the line. Now on this side I am going to use my pusher just to make sure I stay even on the first few cuts. So I'm going to push here, light pressure up here. Depends on how comfortable you feel with your saw. You can take your push stick. I do better with this. I don't have a good push stick yet. I just got this whole crappy one that came with it. I know they make one called the Gripper. It's supposed to be really good. It's got more traction on it. You can actually push down a little bit better. Because if you can see, my 4x4 is not laying perfectly even here. So I want to make sure I want to keep it even as possible. So steady pressure down and steady pressure across when you're cutting. Again, at least on the first couple cuts, that way you make sure you get it correct. Again, I'm a rookie. I don't use this a lot. I'm not a table saw user all the time. I cut pieces here and there, but the more comfortable you feel with this. I've seen some people, once you get that first groove, some people just take it and force it back and forth across. I'm gonna be a little bit more cautious. I'm cutting these. By the time I get to the fourth board, I might be just slicing across too, but for the most part, I'm gonna take my time right now so I don't chop off fingers. I like them. So what you end up with is basically this, like this, and these snap right off. I'm gonna break these out. Got that one a little bit too thick. If you got a wood chisel, you could chisel it out of there. I don't have wood chisels yet, maybe one of these days. So I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna clean mine up. I'm gonna use an oscillating tool to clean mine out of there. So you break the fins out, and then we're gonna clean up this mess right here. I'm gonna clean up these grooves with an oscillating saw. Now you can also take your skill saw and you can cut those out by hand. As a matter of fact, what I might do on the next one, I might try it with the skill saw, just see if I like it any better. And also, again, rookie, keep repeating this over and over. Don't do what I just did. I just lined my blade up with the pencil mark. This is my finished side. I didn't flip my board over when I did my cut. Luckily for me, this is a nice finished edge over here also. But when you line your blade up, don't do what I did and cut the wrong side. So I'm just gonna take this, I'm just gonna clean these out. Now you can make that as perfect or imperfect as you want. For me, that'll do the job for me. Just take my 2x4, double check, and I mean, I personally can't be happier with that. Somebody else out there will criticize it, but for the most part, I'm happy with the way that turned out. I'm gonna film myself repeating that entire thing. I will film cutting out one more of these notches with a skill saw versus with the table saw. And then you just pick which other method works for you. I'm gonna cut the rest of them out. So once I cut this one out with a table saw, I will come back with all the pieces done, ready for the next step. So I've got my skill saw. I've loosened my blade depth adjuster. This is gonna be a lot easier to adjust the depth on for sure, because I can just take my plate, slide my plate to wherever I need it at. Again, I just wanted to barely cut through that 2x4. I'm gonna lock my plate down. So again, I'm not sure how if you can see it well on the camera. I've just barely got that poking through. I'm actually going to loosen it or make it a little bit deeper. You can always come back and notch a little more. You can't add wood back in without too much work. So once I get that set, I'm just going to start cutting across these. So I found this to be really helpful when you're doing a straight line. If you put a square on here, I know I'm going to cut a straight line. I use the square as basically like a fence for my saw. And that way I can cut across and make sure I get a good straight line. So I'm going to do that for the first one. I'm going to move it down and do it for the back one. Then I'm just going to take my skill saw and just notch the middle out. And I'm just going to take these and snap them out. Those bigger cuts, a little bit harder. You might want to make some thinner cuts. Again, depends on if you have a wood chisel. These are still breaking out like they should. And the same as the top notch, clean that out as well as you want. Take my 2x4, and again, I'm ecstatic. So I'm going to repeat this process. Again, I'll come back once I got all my post cut. Now one other thing to remember, table saw with a vacuum on it, skill saw without a vacuum on it. Made a whole lot bigger mess with the skill saw, but it was a lot faster and a lot easier for me to navigate. Just to make this easier, what I did is I went over to my table saw and I cut my outside lines just to make life easier when I cut the rest of it out with my skill saw. So I made sure those were even, and then I can just notch it out now. All right, one more thing. Sorry, I keep adding this stuff. Hopefully you watch the entire video before you start cutting. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these other two boards with the table saw, just notch my grooves out here. When I do this, the other thing I'm gonna do on my end here is I want to take off this end piece too with the table saw. I did that with a skill saw. It wasn't as pretty as I'd like it to be. So when I take off the end, I'm going to take off this piece here with the table saw also. So basically I've cut a really thin wedge right here. I'm going to knock that block out, knock that block out. Make sure when you're running your saw through, don't do what I did on the last one. You get kind of lazy when you're pushing the skill saw through. Make sure you push the skill saw through to where the blade cuts all the way through the other side so you're not having to notch it out later. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my 2x4s going across the top and the bottom, in the front and the back. Again, I want 1.5 inch overhang on both sides. I take 3 inches off my 72. That gives me 69 inches. So I'm going to mark these at 69. And then I'm going to cut these 4 boards off. Now there's different grades of 2x4s. Some of them are really not holed and marked up. I went with the medium priced 2x4s, and I went through and picked the best I could out of the stack of lumber. When you're measuring these off, just make sure if you've got any markings or imperfections you want to try to find the best end of your boards to save for your bench, just so you're not having to cover them up later. Now when you're cutting these, that's my long end of the board down there. So make sure you don't cut on the wrong side of the board. I'm actually going to cut on the outside edge of this line because I measured my measurement up to that. And again, if you just bump that, you'll see you can make a little notch in the board. And that way you know you're going to cut on the outside edge of the line. Make sure you're against your fence. Plug in your saw. So after you plug in your saw, it does work a lot better that way. And I'm going to repeat that for the other 3 boards. All right, so I just test fitted them together, make sure everything worked. I did have to notch this one just a hair. My test 2x4 apparently is a little bit thinner than that one. But as you can see, my corners are all square, my inserts are done. So, ready for the next part. So I'm going to put lag bolts in these to hold them together eventually. But I need to hold it in place temporarily while I get the sides on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flush out the end here. I'm going to run a couple screws in it temporarily. So once I get my end flushed out, I'll take my square, put it on the inside here. So I make sure that I'm square going up and down. And I'm going to put the screws in where I'm going to put the lag bolts. So I'm going to put the lag bolts top and bottom. You can measure these if you want to. I'm just going to eyeball them. Make sure your board doesn't walk on you like mine's trying to. And again, I'm going to pull those back out later and put lag bolts through there. So when you do the top, same thing, you want to make sure you flush your top out, flush your side out really good. Then we're going to take our square, run it on the inside edge, and make sure we're square in the corner. Now if you wanted to, depending on what kind of weight you're going to pull in here, you could leave those screws in there. You could run 4 screws in there. Probably hold just fine. I just want to lag bolt mine. Now if you feel better, make sure you can pre-drill these if you want to. If your wood's really dry, or if it's just, you know, if you feel better about doing it, because there is a chance you'll split that board. Split the board and then you're cutting a new one, so up to you. So there's my front and my back. Now I need to cut my side pieces. I've got a couple pieces of 4x4 left over here. You could use a 2x4 or a 4x4 for these crossbars. I'm going to put a 4x4 on the bottom and then a 2x4 on the top because that's what I have left over. If I run back to Lowe's, I might buy one more 4x4, but it's another 20 bucks that I really don't need to spend unless I want to. All right, so to make my inside beam here, I got 20 inches on my drawing here. That's 20 inches plus 3.5 on both sides for the 4x4s, which is another 7 inches. So it makes it 27. Then I've got a 30-inch tabletop, I want 1.5 inch overhang on each side, so that's the other 3 inches. So that's how I came up with the 20. So I need to make a 20-inch beam to go between here and here. So I got my 4 side piece made. I'm gonna put them in here, and then I'm gonna take a clamp and I'm gonna clamp them together. I'm gonna pull my screws out and then run the lag bolts through. As you can see, I've clamped my boards together. If you don't have a clamp, you can use some temporary screws. You can put a couple little cleats under this bottom one if you need to hold it in place, whatever you got to do to get it held in place. I'm going to measure up on the side over here so I line up my board evenly. Then we're going to take our drill, pull these screws out, and run our lag bolts all the way through every beam. One of the things you can do is you can add some wood glue if you wanted to. Don't have to. Thought I'd just show you a quick way also of doing this. To hold up the side over here if you need to. I'll take this 2x4, it's just a piece of scrap. Come on the outside here and mark it. I'm going to chop this off with my chop saw and then slide it under my front. If it fits, then I can use 2 of these to put underneath my side, hold it in place while I'm screwing it in. I've got my 2 blocks. So one on this side, this side. Just take my hammer and push it down to where it's touching on both sides. Then flush the edge out. Flush this edge out, which it is. And I'm just going to screw them in from the sides now. I am going to pre-drill those when I do that. So as you can see, there's my bolts. So they're going to bite into here. They're going to bite into this board at least 2 inches. Which is what I want. Again, you could probably bite into it 1 inch, 1.5 inches. Wouldn't matter, but I'm going to run mine through and I'm going to pre-drill them so I don't split the wood when I do it. Now, if you don't have clamps, you can leave the screws in or leave 1 screw in temporarily. Back the 1 screw out, but since I got a clamp here, I'm just going to clamp it tight so it doesn't move. I'm going to pull both screws out and run them in. So after you get the screws out, make sure you pre-drill the holes deep enough to keep the wood from splitting. You want to do that for every single hole. You could probably get away with drilling it straight in without splitting the wood, but there's no sense in taking a chance. Repeat the same thing on the top and work your way all the way around, doing all 4 corners, top and bottom. So there's my foundation all bolted together, solid as can be. If you wanted to, you could put your top on it now and finish it. I want to put a shelf on the bottom of mine. So I got some 1x1. I'm going to nail or screw around the edges of it. I'm going to use some deck boards to fit inside. I'm going to take a 2x4 and put it across the middle there and probably just toe nail it in the side for some extra support in the middle so I don't sag. But first thing I gotta do is I gotta clean up in here a little bit, make some room to work. So I'll be back in a little bit. You'll never notice. All right, so there's my board. I've measured 10 inches in the middle, so I've got it going all the way across. This is a piece of scrap wood of what I'm going to use. So I put it in here. I lined it up so I know I'm nice and flush. Took a piece of 2x4, flushed it out. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to toe screw these in so it holds it in place on both sides. Then I'm going to start cutting my planks for the bottom. And again, this is just for some extra support. You don't need it if you're not putting anything heavy on the bottom. And technically you don't need it at all if you're just using it for a top bench. So I took a little bit and pre-drilled these because I don't want to strip them. I don't want it to walk on me. So again, I've got my board in there, flushed it out, and I'm just going to shoot these in to keep it from slipping. So I cut a 1x1 in for the front. I'm going to take screws and just screw it in. I'm going to do one for the back side also, and then I'll lay my boards across there. So once I get that screwed in, the next thing I'll do is cut my planks for the bottom. Just so you can see what I'm doing here for these 1x. I've got my piece of plank here, just a scrap piece. I went to the middle first, lined it up, flushed it out. And then once I get it flush, take a drill, pre-drill it. So I'll put my 1x. And these are 2-inch screws, so I'm 1 inch into here, 1 inch into the 2x4, keeps me from popping out the other side. I just did that on both sides, all the way down. I've got 5 screws in here. You can put as many as you want. So you can see how the boards are going to fit. So now I'm going to cut my boards that go across here, and then we'll get our top on. All right, so there's my planks in there. I've not screwed them down yet. They're still loose. Can't get my foot under there. You can screw them down if you want. You can leave them loose if you want to be able to pick them up out of there, clean underneath there. Depends on whether you're going to secure your bench to the wall, if you're going to be able to move it in and out. So the next thing I got to do is try to get the top on. Now with the width of my boards, they just happen to work out perfectly, so they fit in there fine. That's a 5.5 inch board. Just happen to work out. If for some reason you're off on one end or the other, start from your middle, and basically you would rip one of these down on both sides so you've got the even spacing on both sides, instead of having like one little board on this side and a full board on that side. Up on top of there, I need to secure it. I'm going to secure it from underneath. You can do this several ways. Some people would just shoot screws right through the top, depending on the work surface you want. If it's just a workbench, you're going to be nailing stuff too, throwing heavy stuff, it's going to get beat up. You can just screw right down through here into the boards below. I'm actually going to go underneath, kind of like I did from the bottom. I'm going to toe nail, or toe screw I should say, because I'm not actually nailing. I'm going to throw some angled screws up in here and tap into the bottom of the board. That way I don't have anything on the finish of my top. So first thing I need to do is square off my tabletop. So I'm just going to walk around here and check my dimensions and make sure that I've got the same measurement all the way around the table. Once I get that done, we'll go underneath there and tighten it up. So what I want to do, I want to just take my drill and try to stay out of the camera and see what I'm doing here. It's going to be difficult. I'm going to start a hole here. I'm not going to drill through, and then I'm going to drill up at an angle. And that'll keep my screw from splitting my wood. And then this is going to go up in at an angle. This is a 2.5 inch screw, so it won't go through the top of my board. And I just want to do that probably 6 or 7 times down both sides and a couple on the ends. One other thing, if you're doing this by yourself, if you put some weight on the top, that'll help keep you from pushing up. It'll keep you from getting a gap when you run your screw in. So I've just put some weight on top here. I've used some wire boxes, that way I can keep my table straight as I go across. As I'm pushing up the screw, I don't actually push the table up off of my 2x4s. All right, so there's the finished product. Again, the top screwed on now. I just went in there. I've got 5 screws on each side, 3 screws on both ends, just screwed up in. Again, 2.5 inch screws, pre-drilled them so I wouldn't split my wood. Yeah, you can attach that with you could put a 2x4 underneath there, screw it up into it. Again, you could just screw right down through the face here into that 2x4. However you want to finish your top. I just want a nice smooth top finish, so that's why I did mine.